the FBA program is much more reliable to get a product to them, but you cannot ignore the MFN program because they're never going to tether you on how many books you can sell. So, and beyond, the number one advantage is that they don't tether you, but that opens you up to a lot of other things within book selling that you wouldn't have otherwise using just the FBA program. And I didn't actually learn this until they put restock limits into effect, and I was really forced to go really heavy into MFN. And what I saw was, when you're an FBA seller, the typical rule of thumb is that because Amazon puts all these restrictions on how many books you can send into their warehouses, how long those books can be in the warehouses, you typically send in lower ranked books and that are going to sell fast, because you don't want to send something into FBA, have it sit there for 6 months, and then they're just going to kick it out because it didn't sell, because you didn't give it the time to sell. Well, when you do merchant fulfilled, it's going to open you up to so many more books, because the rank really doesn't matter. If there is enough profit in a book, you can leave it sit on your shelf for years. So if there's a book that you can buy for $2, it makes $70, but it has this rank that you would normally never touch with the FBA program, I would tell you in a heartbeat, pick that book up, throw it on your shelf for merchant fulfilled, and leave it there and see if it sells in 5 years. Because if you bought it for $2 and it sells for $70 5 years later, that's a heck of a trade-off. I mean, that is good margin. That's not something you want to pass up on. You're going to do it on FBA more than likely, because the chances of it selling in that 6 months, it's not out of the realm of possibility that book will sell in 6 months, but it's not very likely. So you tend to ignore those books at the FBA side. But once you launch into MFN, you'll start looking at this stuff and saying, I'm not going to pass up all this profit on these books just because they might not sell in 6 months. I'll happily throw them on my shelf and leave them sit there until that right buyer comes along to buy that book. And with that said, if you're outsourcing, even if you're just starting in your book business and you're looking at, like right now, I'm only going to be focused on FBA, but maybe if you come upon one of those books while you're sourcing, why wouldn't you pick that book up? And believe me, when you go into a thrift store and you source, it's not like you're going to walk into one of these stores and find hundreds and thousands of those books. It's going to be a book here and there. So, I mean, it's worth it to you to look at those books. And yeah, you could just send them into FBA, those higher ranked books. But do you want to deal with, okay, I'm going to send it into FBA, and then in 6 months, I either have to pay an enormous fee to keep that book there, or I need to have it returned back to me. And then once I have it returned back to me, I can't send it back into Amazon for a certain period of time. So what I would tell you to do is have a small bookshelf in your house, and those unique books that you find, just throw them up on that shelf and sell them as merchant fulfilled. And that kind of gets your feet wet with merchant fulfilled. It gets you used to needing to check your email and see if a sale came in, and making sure that if the sale did come in, you get it shipped out on time so Amazon's not penalizing you for it. And that's a great way to learn that aspect of the business, because that fulfillment side of it is very different from the FBA program. So if you're doing FBA for years and years and years, first of all, a big thing I see is that sellers get lazy, and they don't want to ever, after they've been spoiled with FBA for so long, they're not willing to even look at merchant fulfilled as an option, because they don't even want to mess with that part of the business. Whereas if you're doing that from day one, you're going to realize it is more work, and there is more, I guess, deadlines that you have to meet, but the deadlines are by no means ridiculous or anything like that. It's not really a big deal once you get the right system in place and you're just checking it every day and shipping those books out. I mean, if anybody says that their life is so busy that they just simply cannot do that, I mean, I would love to see your life, because I don't see it. It's if you're not selling an exuberant amount of books, you're talking about shipping out 2 books a day within 24 hours or 48 hours of it ordering. I mean, that's, you come home from work, you sit down in front of your computer, you look. If you sold a couple books, you go pull them, pack them up, take them to the post office the next day. It is not the end of the world. So I highly encourage everybody to look at this, because like I said, when I was forced kind of to go into this space because of the restock limits going into effect, it really opened my eyes, because I was looking at my supplier's product list, and I was like, I realized that there was this massive amount of product on every list that I got that I just flat out ignored, because I ignored it simply because the rank was so high on it. And once I really looked at it, I'm like, wow, this is like having another entire supplier now. Because if I buy all of this, if I continue to buy the product for FBA that I had been buying, and then I go and I run that same list through, and I take all that stuff that's higher ranked, really high profit, it's like doubling the amount of items you can order, because the class, I guess, of books, or the book that you're looking for in both business models is very different. You're looking on the FBA side, you're only looking at faster moving, higher or lower sales rank items, whereas on the merchant fulfilled side, you can look at everything. And when you look at everything, you'll realize, like, there is a lot of crazy profitable books that just do not get a lot of sales. And if you can source those, now understand, a lot of those books have, we're talking very, very, very low volume sales. So they might only sell once every 3 years. But if you can pick that book up for a cheap enough price that it's worth it to put it on a shelf for 3 years and wait for that buyer to come along, in most instances, a buyer will eventually come along, and you're going to reap that benefit. And there's really no expense to you for doing that, other than the fact that you have to check your email every day and make sure that if a sale comes in, you can ship that item out. And now, if you look at it and say, well, I really don't have time to check my email every day, then I would look at you and say, well, I'm really sorry, but if you probably should not be venturing into starting an Amazon business if you do not have time to check your email every day. Because you should be checking your email every day, regardless of which program you're using, FBA or merchant fulfilled, because Amazon's going to send you communications. They're going to have issues. They're going to need you to be looking at what's going on, so you know maybe they're restricting every book you're sending in, and if you're not checking your email, you'll never know that. So if the response is that, well, checking my email and making sure I'm getting my orders out in 48 hours is just not something I have the time in my life to do, then my response to you would be, if that's the case, then you do not have the time in your life to build an Amazon business. And before you even start down this path of building an Amazon business, you need to get the time available to do it. And that would entail checking your email once a day. So that kind of outlines MFN. The other thing I think we should mention with MFN is that a nice thing about the FBA program, and I honestly don't think we even talked about this on the last podcast about FBA, but one of the things that Amazon does provide is that when a customer has an issue with an item via FBA, they deal exclusively, or they're supposed to deal exclusively with Amazon and not directly with you. What that means is if a book gets damaged in the post office, and you'll never even hear anything about it, they'll call Amazon customer support